Welcome back to Route Double. We last left off, I believe, we were... having a chat with Anna. She hasn't really said anything to directly put us off. We're also talking about terrorists.
そして Q はその中で最も狡猾で執念深い組織なのよ。知ってるかもしれないけど、過去に何度もテロを成功させている。今まで政令指定機密都市を狙った例はないけれど、あなたたちの話も冗談とは到底思えないわね。
Anna quietly sighed. It appeared that the reason she honestly believed their story was because it was a possibility she had feared from the start.
Q という組織の危険性は分かった。でもどうして警察などに検挙されないの？
それは Q の構成員の大半がその辺にいる普通の人々で成り立っているからよ。
普通の人々？
Q は昔の過激派とか都市ゲリラとは違って大々的に存在を主張したりはしないのよ。もちろんどこかのアジトにこもって武力闘争の訓練なんてのもしない。ただ独自のネットワークでコミュニケーターに対する不快感を持つ一般人を探し、少しずつ同志に引き入れていくのよ。
でもテロリストが勧誘なんてしたらすぐ捕まって。いい
え、奴らは同志を勧誘するときはカムフラージュのため様々な名前を使うの。例えばコミュニケーターとの関わりについて考える会とか当たり障りないやつね。だからその時点では構成員となる人自身も自分が Q に入ったんだって気づかないらしいの。組織の実態は大半の構成員にさえ分かってない。そもそも Q という組織名すら便宜上の故障に過ぎない。
The Association for Consideration of Relations with Communicators. It's the gateway group to terrorism.
だから警察も捕まえにくいのよ。
そういうことだったんですか。
It seemed to be the reason why Natsuhiko hadn't even heard of the name Q until a few days ago. Because Q was a unique kind of terrorist organization, one whose very structure was ambiguous.
でも Q の上層部はあくまでテロのために動いているんですよね。
そうよ。上層部は無数にいる下部構成員から実行犯となり得る人物を選んで何年もかけてテロ計画を進めていく。実行犯にはターゲットとなる建物などの関係者が選ばれることも多い。内通者の存在が彼らのテロの成功率を上げているの。その結束力と信念を支えるのは得体の知れない憎悪。自分たちと彼らは違うというだけで他者を憎み排斥し傷つけ、果ては街に火を放てる異形の精神構造。
It is quite twisted.
人間がこの世に存在するのか。
Natsuhiko's very core shuddered to hear the entire story. Not once in his life did he expect there to be people who hated communicators like him to that extent. We've never even met. We've never even done anything wrong. That was when Natsuhiko first knew that the world was full of malice. A peaceful life was not a given, but rather something narrowly established on a precarious balance. But the kids cast their eyes downward at this newfound truth. Anna spoke to them gently.
ごめんなさい。ショックだったでしょ。こういう社会の真の姿や本物の悪意の存在は大人になってから知るべきなのに。だからこの学校ではこんなことは教えないのよ。生徒がいたずらに不安になるし、それはそれで対立の種になるはずだから。この町では報道も規制され、ネットもフィルタリングされている。まあ調べれば Q の存在等を知ることはできるのだけどね。
It did seem like an obvious decision on the school's part. The school instilled the fear of ordinary people into the minds of all the communicators who attended, that the cycle of antagonism would never end.
でもね、あなたたちなら冷静に受け止められると思ったの。クラス一しっかり者の鳥羽さんと クラス1聡明な三宮さんとクラス1適正度が高い天川くんとデコボコトリオだけど、だからこそ3人なら受け止められるはずよね。
もちろんです。
そうですよ。そんな悪意なんかにへこたれる私たちじゃないです。万が一のことがあっても私が2人を守ると約束した。
そう、話してよかったわ。
Anna smiled sweetly, then she spoke clearly and distinctly.
ここから先は大人の仕事よ。あな
Uh-huh.
たたちはおとなしくしてなさいな。
Respectfully, we're a bit too far into this to not.
昨日の爆弾騒ぎの後で保安課や警察の人から話を聞いたわ。テロの可能性については彼らもすでに考えている。だから今町は戒厳令の中にあるわ。この町でテロなんて起きたら十数年かけて作り上げた体制にひびが入りかねないもの。厳しい言い方かもしれないけど、子供がちょろちょろしては邪魔になるだけ。
No, it's perfectly fair.
きっと保安課の人たちもそう考えてあなたたちを保護しようとしているのよ。
Questionable, but reasonable.
でもだから何もするなって言うんですか？
そうですよ。この町が大変なことになるかもしれないのに先生なら見過ごせますか？
分かってるわよ。見過ごせはしないわ。これほど綺麗に見える街だもの。守りたくなるわよね。完璧に見えたシステムが本当は穴だらけだったとしても市民にとっては大事な街だものね。
As she spoke, Anna glanced at the classroom door.
それでも今は帰りなさい、3人とも。そして保安課の人たちが来たら彼らの言う通りにするの。
Well, this is how it's not going to go over well with our gang. This is going to cause problems if we raise Anna high.
それがあなたたちが今一番すべきことだわ。
Yep, that dropped Mashiro. Natsuhiko felt irritated. You could tell Anna was worried about them, both them and the city. Yet in the end, her opinion still didn't mesh with theirs? Damn it, we need to persuade her somehow. There's be some way we can convince her. As soon as Natsuhiko pondered that question, Mashiro suddenly spoke up.
それでも今はそれがあなたたちが今一番すべきことだわ。
That drops favor with Mashiro. Natsuhiko felt a little lonely. Anna acknowledged what they had to say, but in the end, she still treated them like children. Regardless of their student-teacher relationship, her way of thinking sided with the adults, the security department, if anything. Damn it, is there nothing we can do? Is there no way we can get Professor Tsubakiyama on our side? As soon as Natsuhiko pondered that question, Mashiro suddenly spoke up. That's a really weird distinction there. I don't understand that choice. I almost want to...
それでも今は帰りなさい、3人とも。それが
Yeah, it definitely drops Mashiro. Irritated. Okay. So really the only change is that I know Anna's worried about you. I know Anna's worried about us, but she didn't agree with us. And in this case, that kind of irks me, that understanding Anna's point of view drops Mashiro's affinity, but then again, that's supports everything we've seen from Mashiro so far. In this case, we don't understand it.
わかりました、先生。言う通りにします。
Natsuhiko was surprised, but Anna spoke in relief.
ありがとう。聞き分けのいい子たちで先生嬉しいわ。
いえ、私普段から先生のことを尊敬してましたから。それじゃあ夏彦、サリュ行こ
う。いや、ちょっと待てよマシロ。そんなこと急に言われても。
いいから。
Around the same time Mashiro said that, she used telepathy.
二人とも何も言わないで。事情はここを出てから説明する。とにかく逃げるよ。
What exactly did she mean by run away? Natsuhiko was bewildered, but one look at Mashiro's tense expression stopped him from asking her.
わかった。
了解。
Mashiro nodded and then spoke to Anna.
それじゃあ先生、失礼します。
ごめんなさいね。力になれなくて。
They left Anna alone in the classroom with an apologetic look on her face.
おいマシロ、逃げるってどういうことだ。
We're gonna have to be told that Anna's heart's closed now, right? Mashiro shushed him and answered with telepathy.
先生を信じちゃダメ。先生、私たちに心開いてないよ。どういうこと？さっきの話の終わり際、先生が妙に堅くなだったでしょ。だから先生に対してエンパシーが使えるかどうか試してみたんだけど、心の声は全く聞こえなかった。心を開いてない証拠だよ。
Mashiro's eyes were blurred with sadness. The smile he saw on Anna's face just now flickered in the back of Natsuhiko's head. It was such a kind smile by appearances, and yet... Did Professor Tsubakiyama not actually trust us? Couldn't understand why not, but he could smell danger somewhere. This is gonna make me mad if this literally just boils down to you're kids, you shouldn't be doing this shit.
このままここにいたら保安課を呼ばれちゃうかもしれない。焦らず急いでここから離れよう。
Kids walked down the hallway trying to look as casual as they could, nimbly passing through surveillance camera dead spots all the while.
では次はどこに行けばいい？まずいね。浮田のおじさんにも会えないし、もう頼れる大人がいないよ。
Never know, maybe she did fully intend on going to Labo to try and put a stop to things herself. Natsuhiko pondered Mashiro's observation. He noticed that he did have one person in mind.
どうしたの？夏彦。何か思いついたの？
いや、一応ほとんど面識ないに等しいけど。
誰？
マシロもサリも知ってる人だよ。
Hmm? It seemed to finally click for Mashiro when he said that.
そう。
Didn't click for me.
詰められた時はやっぱりヒーローを頼るとしよう。
I need a hero. With that, the kids left the school. As they boarded the taxi, the driver asked them.
次はどちらへ？
消防署まで。
The driver nodded and began to input their next destination. Long drive. Doing Moribe's duty. Rokume City Central Fire Station. Natsuhiko, Mashiro, and Salu got off the taxi in front of a building they had never visited before. They weren't entirely sure of how the fire department was organized, but the rescue squad members were probably here too.
消防署ということは森部純に会いに来たの？
そういうことだ。まあ一か八かだけどさ。
純さん言ってくれるといいけど。
But considering what had happened so far, they had no room for optimism. Might get the same reaction we got from Professor Tsubakiyama, so we need to be careful. I don't know if I can pull it off or not, but I'll try using empathy too. I can't just make Mashiro do all the work. With that thought in mind, they stepped foot onto the premises, prompting a cheerful voice to call out to them.
あれNatsuhikoくんましろちゃんルイーズちゃんじゃん。どうしたの？
Hi, Jun.
あ、こんにちは、ジュンさん。
お久しぶりです。こんにちは。
Oddly enough, Sally seemed to have read the atmosphere and greeted her courteously.
いい挨拶だ。あで、なーにこんなところまで。ひょっとして私に会いに来たのかな？
そうなんです。
We did.
マジ？実はですね、ジュンさんに相談したいことが。
The kids explained the circumstances to the cheerful and casual Jun. They told her about the terrorists boiling with hatred in the city. They told her about the possibility those terrorists could conduct destructive activities in various parts of town. At the end of their explanation, Jun asked them with a serious look on her face.
それ、本当の話かい？
冗談みたいな話ですけど、本当です。
だろうね。声がガチだもん。
It certainly explains why she's up for it. Joining with Ukita. As Jun made a bitter face, Mashiro asked her again.
ジュンさん、信じてくれるんですか？いや、あんたたちの話だけだったら正直信じてなかったんだけどね。ちょっと私としても気になることがあったもんだからさ。どういう意味？いやね、最近私たち出場が多すぎるんだよ。事故の数自体が不自然なくらい増えてる気がするんだよね。
ジュンさんはそれらの事故や事件もテロの一環だと？
全く考えもしなかったけど、君らの話聞いてそう思うようになった。職場の雰囲気も最近ピリピリしてるし、みんなもなんとなく変だとは思ってるんじゃないかな。
なるほど。
As he listened to Jun's answer, Natsuhiko concentrated with all his mind. First he searched for Jun's characteristic brain waveform and quickly identified it. Jun's a Type 8, huh? That was the waveform associated with idealists and challengers. He found it fitting as he concentrated further. Now I need to try the same trick I did when I read Mom's mind, assuming that wasn't just a hallucination, that is. Focus from the bottom of my heart. I want to know what's on her mind. He fiercely wished to know whether or not Jun truly believed what they said.
どうしたのさ、夏彦くん。急に難しい顔して。
Natsuhiko paid no heed to her voice and concentrated further. Suddenly, Jun's natural voice disappeared and another voice echoed in his head.
ねえ、ちょっと大丈夫？聞こえ
Empathy mode.
聞こえてないみたい。どうしたんだろう、本当に。
Unfortunately,
ほど心配だったのかな。そうだよね。私を頼ってくることだし。だったら安心させてあげなくちゃ。
Natsuhiko gasped. This time he was certain that it was no hallucination. That was Jun's mental voice. I used empathy. He was both surprised and grateful. Looks like I figured out the trick. I guess intention really is important. Yay! Gold star, Natsuhiko. Perhaps people are best able to learn new abilities when they truly need them. Furthermore, Jun's innermost thoughts were full of concern for the fate of them. Natsuhiko took a big breath of relief. I mean, you could still read that as patronizing concern versus legitimate concern, but it is concern.
大丈夫です。なんかジュンさんが信じてくれたことで気が抜けちゃって。
気弱いね。そんなこっちゃダメだよ。男の子なんだから。でもよかった。他にもう頼れる人もいなかったんです。いやいや、私 私でよけりゃできることはするよ。まあうちはテロは専門外もいいとこだけど、なんなら上に掛け合って。
Before Jun could complete her sentence, a shrill sound interrupted her.
何の音ですか？
出場。
At very moment, Jun's face became stern. And at the same time, they heard a siren echo from the fire station building.
何が起きてるんだ？
どうやらあれのせいみたいだよ。
Kids didn't notice until Jun mentioned it. Far from the distance, they could see black smoke. Don't tell me that's another terrorist attack. The moment that thought crossed Natsuhiko's mind, Jun patted him on the shoulder.
ごめん、私ちょっと行かないとダメだ。君らの相談に乗るのはまた後になりそうだよ。ジュンさん。
Marshall spoke with an expression full of anxiety, but Jun just smiled as if to cheer her up.
なんて顔してるのさ。君らも私も街を守りたい気持ちは一緒だよ。私は私なりのやり方でこの街を守る。あんたたちもやれることをやるんだ。いいかい？
Gavish!
うん、いい返事だ。それじゃあね、みんな。また後で。
Kids waved their hands as Jun headed inside the fire station. Before long, a fire truck emerged from the station and passed by. Natsuko muttered as they watched it leave.
やれることをやるか。
They nearly had Jun's cooperation, but they couldn't quite get it. But be that as it may, just loitering here until Jun returned wouldn't quite be doing whatever it was they could.
よし、僕らも行こう。ジュンさんが出動した先でテロが起きているのなら、そこに犯人も来ているかもしれない。
なるほど。犯人は犯行現場に現れるってやつだね。
火事はジュンさんたちに任せて、僕たちは犯人探しをしよう。
What could go wrong? With that decision made, the kids boarded the taxi once more.
運転手さん、あの消防車を追ってください。
よし来た。そんなこと初めて言われたな。しかし
Oh my god.
では音声入力ドライブモード手動。行きますよお客さん。
Driver slammed the accelerator and the taxi sped off towards the lingering smoke in the distance. Marshal Otoba's abilities. And soon enough, the taxi stopped. Kids were shocked to see what lay before them as they got down.
ここは
It was the PRC, the same institution that they had known to be a Q target since yesterday. An explosion probably happened here. There were shards of glass everywhere. The building was wrecked. Jun's team was apparently already inside, fighting fires and saving lives.
やっぱりここが狙われてたのか。
いよいよテロリストが行動を始めたんだよ。
God, I hope the security department doesn't think we're terrorists because we broke in here and assaulted a security guard. Natsuhiko nodded and looked around. There were onlookers gathered around the building. The crowd, of course, included staff members who escaped the building as well as policemen and security department people, but
この中に犯人がいるかもしれない。
ああ、犯人は現場に現れるって言うからな。
they weren't quite sure of the authenticity of that saying, but that was all they could rely on for now. It was quite a difficult task to find the culprit since they had no leads.
マシロ、この中から2日前にバスで会った男を探せるか。
この人だかりじゃ普通に考えれば難しいね。サングラスしてないかもだし。ただ普通じゃない方法なら探せるかもよ。
どういう意味だ？
Empathy.
テレパシーにはこんな使い方もあるってこと。
Marshall gave a bold smile as she placed a finger at her temple.
犯人はコミュニケーターを憎んでいる。だったらこの方法が効くはず。今野獣馬全員に無差別のテレパシーを送るから、挙動がおかしい人がいないか見てて。
Ah.
わかった。
了解。口汚くわめくけど驚かないでね。それじゃ行くよ。
With that, Marshall closed her eyes.
おい爆弾魔、気づかないのかこの間抜け。後ろににっくきコミュニケーターが立ってるのに、のんきに火事場見物かよ。
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off. It's also exceedingly reckless. The head-splitting telepathy echoed inside their heads. At the same time, all the onlookers cowered in fear. Do anyone's reactions look off? Natsuhiko and Sally darted their eyes around the crowd. People were bewildered. People were looking around. There were various reactions, but... Or just one person's reaction stood out as different. At the same time Mashilo's telepathy rang out, a man turned and looked behind his shoulder in shock. Huh? That man looked familiar to Natsuhiko. His stern face, huge body, and finally his uniform. The girls followed the path of Natsuhiko's finger and their faces stiffened. The guard? The very same security guard they ran into when they trespassed in the PRC yesterday. Okay, now that's come full circle. The words they had heard from Anna earlier that day came to mind.
実行犯にはターゲットとなる建物などの関係者が選ばれることも多い。
Yeah, that would do it.
内通者の存在が彼らのテロの成功率を上げているの。
A sleeper agent. That was exactly the answer to the question that had been bugging Natsuhiko since yesterday. The answer to why the security guard overreacted to what they said back then, too. Alright. The answer to why he had filed a false report to the security department. That part's still questionable, but he certainly wants them taken away and not taken seriously. Because he's the culprit behind everything. But when he made that realization, he heard the onlookers start a commotion. That's when Mashiro sent in more telepathy. Commotion grew even louder. The security guard in question became quite uncomfortable and tried to slip his way out of the crowd of onlookers. With that, Sally slipped into the crowd and chased after the security guard. Natsuhiko warned Mashiro as he chased after Sally. Once the security guard slipped out of the crowd, Sally let out a battle cry and lunged at him, dragging him into an alley. Oh boy! Sally sidekicked the security guard in the knee before he could finish talking. Security guard pulled out his extendable baton. But as soon as he got it at the ready, Sally front-kicked his wrist. Baton tumbled onto the ground, but Sally didn't stop. A gracefully executed roundhouse kick drew an arc through the air and into the back of his neck. Security guard muttered a moan and collapsed to the ground. He tried to get up, but his knee gave out and he couldn't stand. Natsuhiko rushed up next to Sally and tried to be the voice of reason. He stood between Sally and the security guard and interrogated the man. Security guard didn't answer. His facial expression merely moved ever so slightly. There's no doubt about it. He's a terrorist. Natsuhiko continued with conviction. Security guard's face warped. He staggered up to his feet. There's no point trying to escape with a pitiful limp like that. The security department's swarming all over the place. Nobody thought that. Mashilo's voice echoed in the alley. Turned around and shouted at Mashiro, which created just a moment's opening. Bad idea. The security guard pulled a small knife out of his pocket. The sound of Sally's voice left Natsuhiko breathless. The security guard readied himself. and stabbed the knife into his own stomach. Natsuhiko doubted his eyes. A spray of blood from the man's stomach splashed onto Salyu's face. Time seemed to stop for a moment. That was, of course, just an illusion. Mashiro's scream snapped Natsuhiko and Salyu back to their senses.
刺した？自分を？
どうして？
Don't tell me he did it to avoid getting apprehended by the security department. He succeeded in blowing up the PRC. His duty is done? So he's basically a suicide bomber? Mashiro shouted to the confused Natsuhiko.
病院に連れて行かなきゃ。
こいつを？
当たり前だよ。死んじゃったらどうするの？
Certainly taking a life was not their intention in the slightest. Sally spoke up quietly.
この男が死亡したら、私たちの身の潔白を証明する手立てがなくなる。
そうだな。救急車を呼ぼう。
But they didn't have their PDAs on them to call 119. Kids reluctantly dashed out of the alley to look for a payphone. As they got out, they heard some onlookers talking amongst themselves.
なんか叫び声聞こえなかったか？
さっきのテレパシーと関係あんじゃねえの？
And then mixed in with those onlookers, they saw familiar people lingering around. They were the men they had been fearing ever since yesterday.
保安課。まずいよ。どうする？
We really in it now. A few minutes ago they would have run, but the situation was different now.
こうなったら一か八か。さっきの犯人を突き出してみよう。保安課に教えれば救急車も呼んでくれるだろうし、それに疑いを晴らすなら今しかないかもしれない。
あんな現場を見られたらまたややこしいことになるのでは。状況だけ見たら善意の通報者を逆恨みして刺した大悪人だよ、私たち。
確かに賭けではあるけど、いつまでも逃げ回っているわけにはいかないだろう。それに早くしないとあいつが死んじまう。ここは逃げ隠れせず保安課と話して真実を理解してもらうのが得策だ。
そうだね。よし。
Mashiro took a deep breath and yelled.
保安課員の皆さん来てください。ここに超真剣爆破の犯人がいます。
しかも自殺未遂してる。救急車も呼んでください。
Security department members rushed over once they heard the kids' voices. We've done what we could. As he watched the security department members rush in, Natsuhiko prayed. He prayed they made the right choice to clear their names of the false charge. Woo, 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 and you're under arrest for murder. Just kidding, we might actually work this out. Kids explained the truth to the security department. The security department called an ambulance and took the man to Rokame City Hospital. Fortunately, his wound wasn't as deep as they initially believed, and his treatment apparently went by relatively quickly. Oh. As for Natsuhiko, Mashiro, and Sally, they were taken to the municipal office and underwent a long, thorough investigation. They explained everything in detail to the security department, starting with why they had sneaked into the PRC. It took a long time to get the security department to understand all the details, and they didn't seem easily swayed, but... Eventually, the security department members went to the hospital and interrogated the security guard, thus learning that he had falsified the report and that his abdominal injury was self-inflicted. Ah, there we go. The kids' methods earned them approval for their recklessness, but their results earned them recognition for successfully apprehending an alleged terrorist in the end.
ご協力ありがとうございました。
And what do you know? Anna was right. With a final stereotypical line for the security department members who had been chasing them for hours, the kids left the municipal office. It was quite dark by the time they had gotten outside.
チェキ一封くらいくれてもいいのに。
Mashiro grumbled as they walked. She was quite on edge when the investigation began, but once she heard that the security guard was okay, she returned to her usual self. I don't know if she's been being too greedy or too soft. Natsuhiko smiled wryly as he made his reply.
まあまあ、 とりあえず交流されずに済んだだけでも儲けものじゃないか。
まあ確かにね、シャバの空気に勝るものなしだね。夏彦たちは無欲。
Unselfish? Sally seemed unsatisfied, but Natsuhiko wasn't at all. Now their names were clear, they could move around without fear of the security department's shadow. And of course that meant they could return home.
やれやれ、ようやく一安心だな。怪我人になったとはいえ、犯人はちゃんと捕まったし。
本格的な取り調べはあの人の怪我が治ってからだって。早くしてほしいよね、まったく。
そうだな。でも今日はもう遅いし、とりあえず家に帰ってご飯にしようか。
ご飯嬉しい。朝食以来何も食べていない。
Natsuhiko smiled at how they were finally able to have a calm conversation for the first time that day.
サリもさぞ腹が減ってるだろ。
だね。サリはずーっと頑張りっぱなしだったからね。ありがとうサリュー。お礼になでなでしてあげる。
Oh, pat pat, pat pat. Mashiro petted Salyu's head just as she said she would. Salyu seemed a little ticklish, but she didn't seem to hate being petted as she obediently allowed Mashiro to continue.
二人を守るためにしたこと、褒められるほどのことではない。またまたツンデレちゃって、この可愛い子ちゃんね。
Oh.
照れているわけではない。というよりむしろ。
むしろ？
こんなことを言ったら変に思われるかもしれないけど、今日はちょっと楽しかった。
I got to see someone stab themselves.
楽しかったって？
I can understand, although no, I kid, I can understand the feeling now that the adrenaline's died down. Natsuhiko and Mashita found themselves confused at the sudden mention of the word. God, stop right-clicking. Salyu nodded as she explained herself.
2日前、バスに乗った時のことを覚えてる？あの時、街を回る約束をしたことを。
うん。
それは思いもしない形で叶えられた。追いかけたり追いかけられたり、街の中を冒険することもできた。まるで夏彦たちの思い出の中に入り込んだみたいだった。
Oh, that's even better.
思い出？
そう、思い出。
Salyu smiled and gazed at Mashiro and Natsuhiko.
私には思い出が何もなかった。故郷には何もなかったから。暗い灰色に塗られたような本当に味気ない日々だけど、今日のことはきっといい思い出になる。この町に来てよかった。
Oh. Natsuhiko inadvertently looked away from Salyu, who was taken completely off guard by Salyu's pure innocence. What's with this girl? She's way too honest. That's just not fair. He looked towards Mashiro. She was pressing down on the inner corners of her eyes with trembling fingers.
サリュー、あんたって子は私を燃えさせるために存在してるの？
お前、今時燃えって死語だぞ。
Yeah, Moe is so 2000.
燃えさせる？多分字違ってるけど、それでもか。意味がつかめない。
気にしなくていいよ。要するに可愛いって言ってるんだ。
そう。
Salyu's eyes wandered in apparent confusion.
ともかく、私の言いたいことは、今日は楽しかったということ。買い物はできなかったけど、それはまた今度にしたい。3人で行きたい。いい？もちろん。今度の日曜日は絶対買い物に行こうね。
僕も賛成だよ。
よかった。2人がそう言ってくれて。本当は新しい服も欲しい。真っ白が選んでくれた服、実はとても気に入っていた。 また選んでもらいたい。選ぶ。もういくらでも選んであげちゃう。他には欲しいものはない？欲しいもの。ぬいぐるみ。
アリスじゃダメなのか？
Actual stuffed animal, not a computing device.
ただ、いつも持ち歩くアリスの他に
Yeah,
部屋に置くぬいぐるみが欲しい。
just more of them.
アリスは真白に名付けてもらったから、今度は夏彦に名付けてもらいたい。
そうか。ネーミングセンスには自信ないんだけど。
夏彦、まさかここで断るようなヘタレじゃないよね。
当然さ。僕でよければつけてあげるよ。
そうだったら嬉しい。きっとそのぬいぐるみも私の宝物になる。もう本だろうがぬいぐるみだろうが地球破壊爆弾だろうが、私が何でも買ってあげようじゃない。まとめて面倒見てあげるよ。お姉さんに任せとけ。
Big Sis senses energized. Marshall struck her chest triumphantly. As Natsuhiko watched the two girls talk, he had a short dream of their future. He saw Sally looking at all the stuffed animals she liked. He saw Mashno enjoying herself as she showed Sally her recommendations. He saw himself watching a short distance away. I'm sure that'd be a fun day. Natsuhiko secretly smiled to himself at the thought. She deserves at least that much of a reward, since she's done so much for us today. That much was certain, but there was still one regretful thing that happened.
でも結局、奴らの狙いだった超神剣の爆破を阻止することはできなかったな。
死傷者が出なかったってのが救いだったけど。
Way to bring it down. Oh, tagged back in. That was another thing they had heard from the security department. Thanks to Jun's team, all the PRC staff members were rescued successfully. That was still nothing to be happy about.
それに実はもう一つ気がかりなことが。あの警備員、バスの中で私が会った男の人とは別人だったよ。多分まだ仲間がいるんじゃないかな。
Natsuhiko gasped at Mashiro's statement.
なるほど。それについては一向の余地がある。それに冷静に考えれば、あの警備員が自分の腹を刺したというのも妙。
どういうことだ？
爆破の目的を果たしたからといって自害する必要はない。それに傷が浅かったというのも気になる。
Worrying?
ここから導き出される答えはおそらく、あの自傷行動はあたかも事件が収束したように見せるパフォーマンスだったということ。
Oh.
パフォーマンス？あそこまでやれば一連の事件の犯人はあの男だったと誰でも思う。しかし本当は他の犯人などから目をそらすための行動に過ぎないのでは。じゃあ
事件はまだ終わってない。
Everyone's faces stiffened at that statement. Natsuhiko stopped walking and interjected.
ちょっと待て。帰る前に考えよう。テロリストの仲間が残っているとして、これから何が起こると思う？
テロの続行？でも、あと狙われるって言ったら。
怪文書が送られてきた BC 関連施設か。
しかしそれらの施設には保安官による警戒がなされていると聞いた。そもそも怪文書は超心理学研究所を爆破するための陽動だもの。その送付先を狙うのは本末転倒。
じゃあ奴らはこれから何を？
Natsuhiko got the feeling they were missing something important. Thought about what that missing something could be. Arson? They wouldn't have had to make such an elaborate diversion to do that. Thought that all the diversion were to set up for the PRC bombing, but was that not the case? Did they have a target besides the PRC? Natsuhiko's train of thought led him to that point before something flashed at the back of his mind. Then realized exactly what it was that they were missing.
なあ、マシロ。お前がバスの中で会った男は、この町の歴史を終わらせるって言ってたんだよな。
そうだけど。
でも、超神拳を爆破したところで、この町の歴史が終わることにはならないよな。というか、超神拳の爆破がそれ自体何かの陽動だとしたら。
Marshall's face froze at the suggestion.
ちょっと待って。超神拳より大きな施設が狙われてるってこと？
ああ、それもこの町を象徴するような、そしてコミュニケーターへの憎悪を晴らせるような。
でもそんな施設どこにあるの？超神拳はこの町最大の BC 研究施設なんだよ。まさか学校とか？
That'd be dead
学
or
校では一度爆弾騒ぎが起きたから。
that'd be more like ending the Count's future, then. Before Natsuhiko began to speak,
私なら
Sally finally broke her silence with a sighed utterance.
私ならあれを狙う。
Sally pointed at the map posted at the bus stop, and on the other side of her fingertip was an illustration. The hexagonal building, Labo.
ラボ？
サリュー、あれは BC 関連施設じゃないぞ。原子力研究所だ。
分かってる。でもあそこには確か原子炉があるはず。
But when he heard reactor, Natsuhiko was suddenly struck by an unpleasant feeling.
それが
テロリストがコミュニケーターを憎み、この町の歴史を終わらせるようなテロを起こそうとしているのでしょ？その言葉の真意が町全体を破壊し、コミュニケーターを滅ぼすということだとしたら。
Natsuhiko and Mashiro gasped at the same time.
確かに。例えばあそこにある原子炉をメルトダウンさせれば、確かにそれはかな。
いやいや、まさかテロリストでもそんなことはしないでしょ。なぜ？それが最も合理的。いや、だって。
She couldn't find how to continue. Sally's idea sounded like a crazy delusion, but it couldn't necessarily be dismissed as nonsense. If they did blow up the nuclear reactor, that certainly would end the town's history. But when he thought that, he suddenly heard Ukita's words playing back in his head.
ロシアのチェルノブイリ原発で起きた事故の話は皆さんも聞いたことがあるでしょう。それによる死者は膨大な数に上りました。近隣の住民や事故処理に当たった消防士など3000人が死亡、そしてその後も増え続けました。
Natsuhiko shuddered. Mashiro started to tremble.
じゃあ超神拳の爆破もやっぱり陽動の一環で Q が本当に狙ってるのはラボだっていうの？
落ち着けマシロ、単なる予想じゃないか。
そう、私の言葉は予想でしかない。だけど可能性があるんだから、ラボに行って注意を呼びかけた方がいいんじゃない？
そうだけど、ラボは。
He swallowed his words. Natsuhiko didn't want to go anywhere near Labo, no matter what Mashiro said, because he could never forget what happened 9 years ago, on July 7th, 2021. That was the very same place he had exposed Yuri to life and death danger. Burned in Natsuhiko's memory was a fire. That day, Natsuhiko and Yuri sneaked into Labo to see the professor. But a fire broke out, and the kids were trapped in the facility. The fire alarm echoed. Yuri kept sobbing, and the broadcast voice kept repeating,
緊急事態につき、セキュリティを封鎖モードに移行。施設内の全ゲートを閉鎖、ロックするとともに、隔壁を封鎖します。
The gate shut in front of them and wouldn't open.
くそ、なんで開かないんだよ。
どうしよう、光。怖いよ。
泣くなってユリ、僕が何とかするから。
Tears welled up in Natsuhiko's eyes. Tears of fear. Tears of pain from slamming the gate with his fists. Eventually, Yuri's coughing started to grow weak. You stay here, Yuri's gonna die. Natsuhiko carried Yuri's body and slowly started to walk. The smoke stung his eyes. He began to tear up. His breathing grew rough. His head hurt. And still he aimlessly wandered, searching for a route to survival. Not even Natsuhiko quite remembered how they were saved after that. He only had the faint memory that someone had come to save them. We were in the hospital before we knew it. Ever since then, the terror didn't end with that traumatic experience. Ever since that day, Yuri could no longer leave the house. It wasn't just Yuri that changed. That day, around the same time as the fire, a small radiation leak occurred within the facility. Labo denied the existence of a leak, and no report was made mentioning it. Considering their efforts after the fact, a radiation leak was the only possible explanation. Natsuhiko was hospitalized for 3 months following the incident. Even after being discharged, he was required to undergo a yearly physical examination at the hospital. Even now, after 9 years had already passed from their narrow escape from death, everything changed after that day. By now, Natsuhiko displayed essentially no symptoms of radiation exposure. His body was almost perfectly healthy. Is this around the time his potential changed? But with every passing July 7th, and with each mention of Labo, he would recall what happened back then. Natsuhiko and Yuri were still bound together by that incident even now. And yet I have to go to Labo again. But when that thought crossed his mind, Natsuhiko began feeling nauseous. He broke out into a cold sweat and his throat went dry. His entire body was tormented by this unpleasant memory. Damn it, is my body refusing to remember? Natsuhiko gritted his teeth, held back the urge to vomit, and finally wrung out some words.
サリュの予想が正しいにしても、これは僕らの手に余る問題だよ、マシロ。
そんな、夏彦は心配じゃないの？
心配だよ。だけど仮にサリュの予想が当たっていたとしたらどうする？原子炉を狙うような奴らをどうやって止めろって言うんだ？
でも、じゃあどうするの？
まずはラボの関係者に連絡して。
As soon as Natsuhiko began to talk, he heard a familiar voice from behind them.
夏彦くんじゃないか。
Ah, Yukita! Natsuhiko gasped and looked at the owner of the voice. A car was parked at the shoulder of the road, and Yukita had come out of the driver's seat.
起きたのおじさん。
どうしたんだい？こんなとこで騒いで。
Yukita questioned the kids with a curious look on his face. Suddenly, Natsuhiko remembered Mr. Ukita's accident.
どうしておじさん、事故なんか。
さあね、ADS がシステムエラーでも起こしたんじゃないか？
でも ADS の故障なんてめったに起きないでしょ？
He didn't think too deeply about the cause of the accident at the time, but what if that wasn't an accident? What if Q targeted Mr. Ukita since he's with Labo? Terrified, Natsuhiko rushed up to Ukita.
おじさん、聞いてください。実はこんなことが。
Natsuhiko and Mashito explained Salyu's conjecture. Ukita probably didn't know who Salyu was, so they explained her story as well. And after he had finished hearing everything, Ukita spoke with a grim look on his face.
うちが Q に狙われてる？大事じゃないか。
おじさんも Q を知ってるんですね。
僕の趣味はパソコンだ。当然ネットだってやるし、それで小耳には挟んでいた。まさか無関係な自分の職場が狙われるなんて思いもしなかったのね。
His phrasing sounded a little cynical, but he appeared to have believed the kid's word. Natsuhiko sighed in relief as he continued the explanation.
さっき一人そのテロリストを捕まえました。
捕まえたって君たちがかい？
はい。でもそいつも陽動要員だったかもしれないんですよ。
ならまだ安心はできないな。しかし我がラボはこの町で一番警備が厳しい。テロリストが狙おうと狙うまいとね、あの警備が簡単に破れるとは思えないよ。
それでも警戒するに越したことはない。
確かに万が一あそこが占拠でもされれば大変なことだ。ならばどうするか。よし、早速警備主任に行って警備を一層厳しくしてもらうとするよ。
はい、お願いします。
Mashita and Ukita smiled at each other. On the other hand, Natsuhiko secretly focused his mind. Sorry, Mr. Ukita, it's not like I don't trust you, but... Decided to read Ukita's mind just to make sure, just like he did with Jun. Searched for Ukita's brain waveform and identified him as Type 1. Continued and focused on the desire to know what was on his mind. Please, Mr. Ukita, open your heart to me. And when that thought crossed Natsuhiko's mind, he heard a voice echo in his head.
この子たちまで巻き込むわけにはいかない。だが時間がない。すぐに対応しなければ。
Natsuhiko had gradually gotten used to it by his third attempt. He successfully used empathy. Above all else, Ukita was thankfully opening his heart to them.
ありがとうございます、おじさん。おじさんに相談できてよかった。
Oh, Sally was Alicent.
いや、当然のことだよ。僕にはラボの職員としての責任がある。
Sally's doing her part to read the reactions too. His reaction too.
何が起きたとしても、君たちを危険にさらすことはないと約束しよう。
The kids felt that having him as an ally would be a big support. Sally obediently listened to Ukita's words.
それじゃあ早速僕はラボに戻る。悪いがこれで失礼するよ。
はい、お願いします。
With Natsuhiko and Alice's voice at his back, Ukita returned to his car. He then drove back towards Leibo. As they watched the car drive off, Sally muttered quietly.
私は他人の心がわからない。
なんだ突然。
いや、だから二人に聞きたいことがあるの。浮田刑事の言動に不審な点を感じた。
He certainly knows more than he's letting on.
不審？
An unpleasant premonition quickly spread among them. Sally petted Alice and continued.
不明な点というのは、アリスが泣いた理由について。さっきのキャンキャンという鳴き声は、相手が焦っている時の声。あの人はなぜ焦ったの
Natsuhiko and Mashito gasped at that word.
ちょっと待って、焦ってたって。
そうは見えなかったぞ。
Do you remember what he just said?
アリスは人間には認識困難な微細な表情の変化も検出する。
That fits perfectly with his mental voice. They know shit's up, I can't get them involved
肌
too.
ににじむ汗、筋肉の引きつり、体の震えなど。
So either he already knows that Leibo's the target, or he's involved in what's going on there. Assuming that what's going on there is more than just simple terrorism.
その分析が間違っていなければ、あの人は焦っていた。
And not,
その理由がわからない。
and not some test that's just experiment that's fucking around with not nuclear reactors. No way. Huh? Which is it? Is Mr. Ukita a victim or an aggressor? As he pondered, Natsuhiko suddenly realized something. There was something bizarre about what he had heard of Akita's mental voice. Hey, there we go.
この子たちまで巻き込むわけにはいかない。だが時間がない。すぐに対応しなければ。
時間がない。
Natsuko had been quite relieved to find out that Ukita's heart was open, but the more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. Why would Ukita think there's no time just from hearing Salyu's conjecture? Hold on a second. That wasn't all that strange. Can't get these kids involved too could be taken in a way that meant he had already gotten other people involved.
可能性は2つある。浮田のおじさんが本当にテロリストに脅威を感じていたか。
実はおじさんもテロリストの仲間で計画を察知されたと思ったから。
I'm more with the former, not the latter. Natsuko's heart pounded. Q uses sleeper agents. Is Mr. Ukita the sleeper agent in their Labo terrorist plot? That would be a hell of a twist.
まずい。とりあえずおじさんを追おう。
Oh god. There's no time for Natsuko to dwell on unpleasant memories. What time is it? It's almost midnight. It's 10 p.m. The kids ran off in the direction they had seen Ukita leave. Only one road red to leave. That's all, folks. We're saving the game and we're ending it off here. Getting closer. It's the night of the final day, which means the next morning we're getting into Labo, one way or another. We're getting in it now. We resolved one problem and we've discovered a much bigger problem. So until next time, until then,